Internet, the Psychologist Casual Review, and today I'm going to be reviewing Feminine Psychology by Karen Horney. So this is a little different from my usual reviews in the fact that it's a collection of articles written in the 30s by Karen Horney. And contrary to, for example, the neurotics of our time, this is a scientific attempt at understanding, meaning it's not going to be addressed to the layman. It's really going to be addressed to the experts, the people who have knowledge within the field of psychoanalysis. Maybe except at the very end of the book, where she gives an introduction to the neurotics of our time. So, what did I feel about this book? I feel that this book was very interesting. I liked it, but it comes with a little caveat, which is basically I found the book unequal. Unequal both in terms of ideas, in terms of how it held up in time, and just in terms of the general vibe of it. So in a way, it's kind of a mixed bag, even though I think there is much more positive than negative. So we're not at that point where it was a bad book. I felt it was a very interesting book. So what I'm going to do, and it changes from what most people do, is that I'm going to present the bad elements and we're going to end up with the positive ones, because that's how I like to roll. So let's get going. So on the bad notes, there's a lot of parts of this book who have aged not finely at all. Mainly her whole theory on premenstrual tension. So for women that have deep despair or anger or sadness before their menstrual cycle comes through, she says that basically her idea is that unconsciously they're afraid of having a child, and that it's a state of tension in which secretly they want a child, or unconsciously they want a child, and consciously they don't want it, and there's that tension, and that's what creates the suffering, the pain, the build-up. And I felt that the theory was interesting, but I don't think it pans out. I asked feminine colleagues of mine if there was any relevancy to it, and apparently not. So, and this is also, how can I say, backed up by the fact that I've never heard of that theory before, and I think I've read quite a bit. So, I mean, if it had perceived or been perceived as righteous, I think we would have kept it. So this is one of those subjects that I feel that she doesn't really hit the nail on the head, so to speak. And there's another one which I found to be interesting but very special, is the fact that for her there is she spins the Freudian argument on the discovery of sexuality on a vaginal basis rather than a clitoridian for the female experience. And it's interesting to spin it around, said no, the vaginal masturbation comes first and then it gets repressed, then there's the clitoridian masturbation that comes through. It's an interesting theory, but it doesn't seem also to pan out. So I was kind of perplexed, and apparently no one takes on those arguments. They're interesting, and perhaps they work for some people, but for the vast majority, apparently it's not the case. So I found them to be very unique. I'm not gonna lie, they're very, very special and very peculiar, but nevertheless they kind of make you think about female sexuality, which I found particularly interesting, even though the righteousness of them is up to debate in a way. So that's where I found that the book was of its time, let's say, and there's things that I personally felt that she might have been pushing the psychoanalytic interpretation of biological phenomenon a little too far. Of course, medicine and pharmacology hadn't come to the point they are now at in the 30s, so a lot of things were unexplained, and she tried to explain them through psychology and psychoanalysis. I feel that that's a very risky game to play in a way that, because you never really truly know, because I think there's an imbrication of so many factors, but saying that one like goes beyond and it's the real reason why is kind of, I would say, very, very risky. And you really, as a clinician, at least as a psychologist, which I'm not a physician at all, so I know nothing of medicine, but I find it very risky even to present those kinds of hypotheses, that it's the psyche that goes beyond and has pressure on the body. Even though it can happen, I feel that we have to be very, very careful and prudent about those hypotheses. And she does state the hypothesis, but she might be a little too trigger happy in the fact of attributing the psyche, the almightiness of the psyche on the body, when I think that it's very subtle as a conversation. It's a conversation that we might have, but it's one that I'm pushing back on because I find it incredibly complex, and you have to know both very well, meaning the biological reality and the psychic reality. So that's about it for the negative parts of the book, or at least those that I felt were pretty negative, in the fact that they were outdated and very, how can I say, extreme in the arguments. Now for the positive sides, which I found were more numerous reading the book, there's that, I think, very interesting point of view that Horney develops, in the fact that she pushes the Freudian arguments at, she pushes back against them, and that's what I felt was very interesting. She says that basically there is no reason why a girl, for example, in the terms of penis envy, which is a Freudian idea that little girls seeing that they do not have a penis when they see the little boys undress, start envying the phenomenon and start wanting to have that organ, that masculine organ. And basically for Freud it was a universal reality that all girls wanted that. And she pushes back saying there is penis envy, but what you have to understand is that it's not de facto, it's not biogenetic. It's because there's such a high expectation of little girls in society and women that they are pushed into a role. They are also downplayed and devalued compared to their male counterparts, meaning that the little girl might feel inferior, and seeing that inferiority also comes at as a biological marker, might envy a penis to try and even out the biology and the whole cultural aspect, knowing that basically everyone is gonna, at least in the 30s, everyone over-evaluated men at the detriment of women. So that I found still holds up very well. And it's true that penis envy for I think is still a very relevant concept. But it's not a relevant concept because it's constitutional to the biology of mankind or the genetics of mankind, because there's a cultural aspect to it. There's a cultural backing of an over-evaluation of certain people. For example, in certain families, a male child can be seen as filled with more potential. And in that way, I think Karen Horney really knocks it at the park, so to speak. And she does say that there is no biological factor of inferiority. It's how we present things, how the child is going to see the culture and integrate what the culture is throwing at it in a way that is much more profound than just, let's say, genetics or epigenetics or whatever. And that I completely back and support, that it's not de facto a state of, a basic state, it's caused. There's also this very interesting thing, and that's one of the things I love Horney for, is she says, yeah, well, there might be penis envy, and it's something to be thought about, but in the case of men, there's also an envy of men onto the female body. And that envy, I think, is something very accurate. Some men, because of a fear of the mother, or a lot of aspects, I'm generalizing, but the idea is that they are also envious because they would like to create. And she even says that in German, all the words to do with creation, or giving birth, or being productive, or all of those words are female in the gendered sense. And in French, it's the same thing. For example, la création is a female way of putting it. It's always going to be female, and it works in French, so make of it what you will, but I find that that's incredibly a good point, that men are in a way envious of the fact that women can create life within their body. A womb envy. I don't think she ever states it directly in this work, but that's kind of the idea she's going for, and that's an idea she'll present afterwards. And that's, I think, a very, very important idea, that envy works in both directions. It's not just, women envy the penis. It's men envy the uterus, envy breasts, and all of those things come together. Of course, there's also, and she doesn't have it in this book, because we did not talk about it as much, but all the trans, basically, problems, and that, focal point that's now in our society. Of course, she doesn't talk about it, or not so much, because she's not that interested in that specific aspect. But there's all that argument of, now that we're at a cross point in our society where gender can be changed or at least reshaped, the questions of penis envy and womb envy are at the forefront, I feel. And I think that it's not an insult to say that there is a penis envy or womb envy. It's just something that might be there within the unconscious. And sometimes, for example, when transgender people talk about their experience, they might say that, yes, there is something of a penis envy, for example, let's say with a transgender man, or a womb envy from a transgender woman. So all those things, I think, are at the forefront of something. Even if Horney is not part of our period, I think those thoughts and those ideas are in a way more present than ever. So that's a brilliant point, I would say, for Horney. There's also a very interesting fact that she basically says that in the eyes of men, there's a fundamental split, not just in terms of sexuality, like Freud, between the Madonna figure, which is perfect and pure, and the whore figure, which is basically the one that's sexualized. She says that there's a split even within the body of women, that men overemphasize and over-idealize the body of a mother, that the mother and the motherness are put on a pedestal of exemplification of what is an ideal body. It might not touch it in the sexual sense, but there is that every woman should be a mother. At least in the 30s, that's how men consciously and unconsciously perceive the things. But the corollary of that, and that's what she explains, is that basically men are going to be afraid, be fearful of the sexualized body of a woman. A woman that's childless, that doesn't want children, is a threat both to the idealization of the body of the mother and a threat to them, because they could be manipulated, controlled, or destroyed by such a figure. And I found that is still very relevant, that body split image of how men see women, or as mothers, or as basically seductive, and both that reassuring and dangerous elements. And I felt that was very pertinent on the part of Horney. Like, it was a very, very good point and a very fine one to make. There's also that whole, I think, humbleness in Horney's writing, that she does say that sometimes life is better than any form of psychodynamic or psychoanalytic form. I don't recall the exact saying, but it's something like life gives the best lessons. And you can see that she basically does acknowledge that psychoanalysis can help, but it's not going to do all the job. It's not there to solve everything, but try and give an understanding. And that was something that I found quite interesting in her approach. And she also ends on the note of the neurotic love, and how neurotic love is basically trying to get a sense of security while also rejecting it. So it's an impossible task. And I found that it was a very interesting note, and having read The Neurotics of Our Time, I felt it was a beautiful opening to that work, even though I read them in reverse. So that's what I felt about this book. So it's in a way, I found it was very positive, but also that it's kind of a mixed bag, especially if you're If you don't enjoy old theories of psychoanalysis, there's a lot of that. And even though she goes against Freud, there's still a lot of basic Freudian ideas that are still very present and she upholds as being true. So I've helped that you found the review valid and interesting, and I'll see you in the next one.